Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we are going to talk about the second house in astrology. So, the last week we talked about the first house, so it obviously follows then that we'll talk about the second house. But what does that mean really? If we look at the astronomy, or really kind of just spatial awareness standing on the Earth, right, we mentioned last week that the first house, the house of self, it's noted, it's defined by where the ascendant is, and the ascendant is the eastern horizon. So that means if you look out to the eastern horizon to find the second house, you'd simply go below it, right, about 30 degrees or so. And that will show you where the second house is. So it's below the Earth, right? It's below ground. So that's going to be one of the things that's going to influence a little bit what this house means. The second thing, it is a succedent house, which means it succeeds the first. So if the first, let's just say we're looking at a planet, for instance. We have the sun. The sun is rising on the horizon. We'd say, oh, it's in the first house. But as the Earth rotates, the sun is going to slowly move into the sky. So what is going to be the next thing that crosses the horizon, right? It's going to be whatever was in the second house. It's succeeding the first. So the second house is a succedent house. The succedent houses were seen as filled with optimism in a lot of ways, right? It's about potential. It's about the thing that is to come, right? So there's a potential there. That doesn't mean everything about the house or that the house represents is always kind of in the future or is always future tense, but it means it's not something that's kind of you dyed in the wool, you can't change it, right? It's not a fully past-oriented thing. It's hey, there's potential here. There's a potential for change, a potential for growth, something that is to come. So that was seen as much more optimistic. The succedent houses were typically considered the good houses. The angular houses were considered kind of more the potent houses. And the cadent, which we'll talk about next week, are kind of seen as the, quote, bad houses. So the second house is succedent, right? It is below the horizon, which means it's going to be more personal. It's going to be more hidden. The houses that are above the horizon are going to be a bit more public, for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, a bit more public. The houses below the horizon tend to be a bit more personal, tend to be a bit more, right, dealing with our private self. And then lastly, it's in aversion to the ascendant. What does that mean? Well, in astrology, you have certain kind of relationships in terms of what a house can see. So how does this make sense? It's kind of wonky, to be honest, but you think of it like this. If you have, say, 12 people standing in a circle, the way the viewership system works is essentially a house or a person could see exactly opposite, right? An opposite house, an opposition. You could see a trine. You could see a square, 90 degrees. Trine's 120 degrees. You could see a sextile, which is 60. And that's it. That was the views. So anything that was immediately next to you was considered in aversion. It's in a blind spot. And anything immediately next to the thing opposite. So in practical terms, the houses then that are in aversion are going to be the second, the sixth, the 8th, and the 12th. At least in aversion to the first. So the second house is in aversion to the first, which means it's going to deal with topics that are uncomfortable. They have nothing in common with the first house. And it's not that the house specifically has nothing in common, but if you look at it from a sign perspective, right? Let's take an Aries rising for a moment, just so we can understand the example. Aries rising is a cardinal fire sign ruled by Mars, and it is masculine. The second house for Aries, or from Aries, is going to be Taurus. Taurus is a fixed earth sign ruled by Venus, and it is feminine. So you have the masculine and then you have the feminine, right? Nothing in common there. You have cardinal and you have fixed, nothing in common. And then you have earth and fire. Again, nothing in common. So you have the three qualities that kind of make up the signs, you have nothing in common for any of them. And so that's what the aversion signs are. They're the places where, when you look at the zodiac signs, there's nothing in common between them. And so the houses in those areas then by nature are considered in aversion. So the second house is in aversion, it's under the horizon, and it's succeeding. So kind of all things combined, you get a house that's generally kind of considered neutral, right? It's not really a good house, it's not really a bad house. It has potential, and it's more private in nature. So what does it represent? Well, it's going to represent, kind of, if we really condense it down to one thing, it's going to be about support. And why is that? Well, it's because it's the thing that's below the first. If you think about it from, right, if you're looking out on the horizon, what's directly below the horizon? It's the earth, it's the ground, right beneath it, right? So it's the thing that's lifting up the first house. That first house being the house of self. So it's the thing that supports the self. Is what the second house is going to represent. Now, if you look at a lot of pop astrology, a lot of astrologers, at least in social media land, will condense down the meaning of the second house to it's the house of money or the house of possessions, house of wealth, and kind of leave it at that. And that is only a partial interpretation of the house. It doesn't look at the full scope of everything it can represent. Because the second house, yes, it does deal with money, it does deal with possessions, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's a lot more than just that, because it represents everything that supports what? The self. So what are those supports? Let's go through each of the kind of the main things. If we think about when we're born, right? What are we? We're a baby. What does a baby need? It needs somebody, preferably a mom, to feed it, to clothe it, to care for it, to give it a place to sleep, right? Preferably, even more so, give it skin-to-skin contact, right? To let it know, hey, I've got this warm, loving, caring body next to me that's feeding me and, right, supporting me, allowing me to live. Baby can't do that on its own. It's incapable. So it needs something to support it. And so the second house is going to represent that quality of support we get from our family, or lack thereof. Because as we look through each of the houses, what we will see is a, quote, good house, a house in good condition, will show somebody who has a lot of the good qualities of that house. Somebody who has a house that's in a poor condition, right, will have a lot more of the negative aspects of that house, a lot more of the challenges. And so keep that in mind, right, as we go through this. Just because you have specific planets in a second house, right, or you have a sign in a house that seems like it would be a good fit, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy. And the idea of how that's all figured out is something called dignity. And that's a whole topic for a different day, so I don't really want to get into it too much. So let's go back to this idea of support then, right? Support from the family. And specifically, it's going to be support from the family when you're a small child, a baby, your baby years. Because the thing is, if we look at what a baby is and how they operate, they take in so much from the parents, from the caregivers, or lack of caregivers. Even on like a very subconscious level, so much is kind of built in and baked in at that point in our existence. It's really wild how much they absorb. I have 3.5-year-old twins, so I'm very recently in this process, and it is incredible how much stuff they pick up. Childs are truly sponges. But the second house is going to represent this aspect of life. So what sign you have, what kind of planets you have in the house, how this house lord looks, is going to really show what was the quality of that early childhood. And not just that specifically, but also the support systems you get from your family throughout your life. And not just family, but the people who you could consider, right, your family, your safety net, if you will. Your friends, acquaintances, right, coworkers possibly. It's going to be different depending on your own circumstances, maybe even government, right? Neighborhood, whatever it is, the things in your life, the people in your life that step in to support you in some way, shape, or form are going to be things that are ruled by the second house. Now, family as a whole is also more specifically ruled by the fourth house. So the fourth house is something we'd want to look at for family. It's going to give us a more in-depth look at the family nature specifically. But in terms of how it supports you, the second house is what you're going to want to look at. And as I said, additionally, friends and things like that. And again, those are also, you look at them kind of more as a broad term in other houses, but specifically as they apply to how they support you, it would be a second house thing. What else, then, is something that supports us? Well, it's going to be our possessions, our wealth, our money, right? The things we acquire, our resources. And resources, I want to split this into kind of two things. One, tangible, which would be like our money and such, and intangible, which we'll end with. But our tangible resources, right? The second house is going to show that. So it's going to show, obviously, what we're, I don't want to say capable of acquiring, but how we acquire it, right? The nature in which we treat our resources. How do we approach them? I want to take two different signs, kind of show an example. The first is going to be the sign Aries. What is Aries? Aries is cardinal fire sign. It's ruled by Mars. It's very potent. And it has second house in Taurus. Taurus is a fixed earth sign ruled by Venus. It's very stable. It's very strong. It's consistent. It's attached to the physical, right? Physical qualities. And it does it in a very Venusian way, which means it wants things that it finds pleasing, finds pleasurable, right? Beautiful in some way. So what does that mean for an Aries? It's going to show that for an Aries rising, the way in which they want to acquire their resources is consistent. It's stable. They want resources to provide that stability. It also means they're typically going to be attracted to sensual things, things they find physically pleasing. So an Aries is naturally prone towards what? Towards, I don't want to say self-pleasure. It's definitely the wrong term there. But it's more oriented towards, right, acquiring physical stuff. Taurus, if we were to look at it kind of in its totality, its kind of main MO is to build this castle of comfort. And that's how Aries approaches its wealth, its possessions. It's trying to acquire lots of goods that make it feel comfortable and safe and stable. Which drives, right? Because again, it's about support. Thing that lifts you up. If your support says, hey, I want those things, what do? You naturally go after them. And again, you look at the dignity to see how well you can do that or how challenging it is to do that. Another thing is it's going to show how we handle our resources, how we treat our resources, right? Certain signs are going to be a bit more prone to gambling, so to speak, versus others. Or how they acquire it tends to be quite a bit differently. For example, let's look at a Gemini rising. Right? What does Gemini do? Gemini has the second sign in Taurus, right? Second house in Taurus. Or sorry, not Taurus, in Cancer. And Cancer is cardinal water sign. It's ruled by the moon. Cancer is very safe, right? It wants to take the safe approach. It's very conservative. It tends to meander around obstacles as opposed to charging through them. And so what does that mean? It means the Gemini approach to its own resources is going to be one of, hey, let me take a conservative, right, less risky approach to things. I don't want to lose my money. And that sets up a lot of what Gemini is about. Gemini is inherently unstable. It's always looking for something to, right, help it because it doesn't quite have that stability that other signs have. And so it's naturally trying to take the safe method. So the second house is going to represent how we handle our possessions, how we acquire our possessions, what kind of things we tend to prioritize when it comes to our possessions. Again, Aries, what is it prioritizing? It's going to prioritize, right, things that are pleasing physically, things that are physically appealing. Gemini, it's a water sign. It's ruled by the moon. It's looking for things that it can protect or that can protect it. It's going to look for things that has an emotional attachment to, emotional component to. Also, family is a big thing for Gemini. So that's the possession side of it. That's the physical side of it, right? So it's going to show us how we approach wealth. It's going to show us how we acquire wealth. When you have transits to your second house, at least in the kind of the physical possession side of it, sometimes, not always, because again, second house is about support in general. So you can have transits to the second house, and this is where I think a lot of people get tripped up. They think, oh, I have this second house transit. It's a good one, right? That means I'm going to make a lot of money during this period, or I'm going to stumble upon something, or what have you. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have something come along where it's like, oh, hey, I met this friend who turns out lifelong is a tremendous friend who's there for me through thick and thin. That's a great support, right? So those can be the second house transits sometimes. They can play out in ways other than just the money side of it. But money is a direct reflection of our own values, which is the last part of this. Second house represents the things that, right, I said, it's our, how did I phrase it? Can't even remember now, but it's going to be the things that support us from our possessions in an intangible sense, if that makes any sense at all, hopefully. But I like the way I kind of phrase this more broadly is it's the house of virtues, right? What are our virtues? Our ethics, our moral codes, our character, the things we pick up that internally kind of guide us, right? Keep us on the straight and narrow. Because if you think about somebody, how do you kind of be somebody that's kind of seen as respectable, right? That's seen as consistent, right? There's somebody that adheres to who they are, which means they have a set moral code, moral character, whatever that is constant, that's in good shape, that they adhere to. So if somebody says, I value honesty, but they're always lying, right? They're hard. Nobody's going to look at that and say, I respect that. No, they're not, right? They're not living up to who they are or who they say they are. And that's this other aspect of the second house. It deals with the parts of us in terms of our values, the things that we value, right? Not just on a physical level, but on a personal level. Moral codes, ethics, right? The things in life that we value. And so the second house is going to describe how we go about those things, how we acquire them, what they tend to orient towards, right? Like, let's go back to an example. An Aries rising, Taurus in the second house, what does it value? It values strength, safety, physical strength, physical safety, right? Physical stability. With an Aries, there is no questioning what it is, right? They're very obvious, very simple, very straightforward. Why? Because what do they value? Stability. If you want to be stable, you have to be consistent. And so this is why Aries is always going to be the same thing. You know what you get with an Aries. It's going to come at you hot and fast, but you know what you get. Right? It's a very obvious sign. Why? Because it values that sense of stability and consistency in a very physical sense, which means outwardly, the way you see it, right, is what you get. And so that's kind of the logical flow. I know this is really abstract, and I hope this makes sense. But to kind of sum up everything, right, the second house is a succeedant house. It's in aversion to the sun. Actually, let's talk about this aversion, right, before we kind of end this. Why is it an aversion, right? It's unseen. It's uncomfortable. Well, if we think again what it's about the things that support us. And that's not something we directly influence a lot of the time, right? If it's other people supporting us, we don't really have control over other people. Either they do or they don't, right? If the other things in the world, if they support us, great. If they don't, well, that's kind of outside of our control a lot of the time. It's not to say it's fully outside of our control, but oftentimes it is. So it's something that's kind of uncomfortable in that sense. Plus, at least speaking as a male, there's certain aspect to us that, hey, I want to be able to say I did it myself. I don't want other people. So having somebody else kind of pushing you up, lifting you up, right, is something that at times can kind of play against that ego a little bit. Another aspect of it is money, wealth, possessions, the physical things, right? Those are things that are, that can be a tricky subject. It can be a tricky thing to have to deal with. It can be uncomfortable at times because money, unfortunately, you need resources to live, which that can be an uncomfortable constraint on your life, right? If you're somebody who's got a great heart, you really want to help people in some specific way, but you don't have any money, you don't have any wealth, you don't have an ability to support yourself, right? How do you go live out that passion? Even if you've got a great gift for it, right? You have to do something else to kind of get there. And that's the nature of the second house. It's an area that's really uncomfortable. And lastly, the character side of it, virtues. Right? Living according to good values, living according to your values, living according to your ethics, even having good ethics. That's something that takes a tremendous amount of effort and discipline, right? And it can be influenced by your beliefs, which is a ninth house topic. We'll talk about in a few more episodes. But it's something that's kind of uncomfortable. Now, how does the second house relate to some of the other houses? Well, it's opposite to the eighth house. The eighth house is going to deal with the shared resources. It's no longer about personal possessions, but what we share with other people. It's also going to be about some psychological stuff. The 12th house is kind of like the other side of the ascendant, right? That is, I like to call the house of vices. Second house is the house of virtues, right? The things that really, those good qualities we can put inside of ourselves to make us excel. 12th house is kind of the bad qualities, right? Again, the vices, things that trip us up. If we look at the houses that are square to the second, I believe that's going to be what I got to think about this. I don't know why I'm tripping. I think it's the fifth house. The fifth house. I don't know why I was blanking on that, but it's going to be the fifth house and the 11th. Right, the other two succeeding houses. Both very good houses. But why do they apply tension to the second? Well, the 11th house is the house of friends, society, social groups. And how does that apply tension to the second house? Well, because again, it's about the idea of support systems. Do you have good support systems from your friendships? Are you making good friends? And if not, they're not going to support you very well. It's going to apply tension there. The fifth house deals with our passions, our pleasures, our romantic life. It's going to deal with the things we enjoy, that are creative potential. And so it's going to show the things that we enjoy in life, right? It's a very Venus-oriented house. And so the fifth house, if it's things we enjoy, right, passions we pursue, that's going to influence and also detract from the resources we have. If we don't have resources, based like the example I just gave a few minutes ago, if we don't have resources, we can't pursue our creative passions, or at least it makes it particularly difficult. The second house is going to be trine to the 6th. It's going to be trine to the 10th. Now, this is kind of an interesting dynamic, because what does that mean? It means there's an easy flow, right? Trine's an easy flow, which means that it is in a position where it's naturally, right? I don't want to say supportive because it's not quite the right word, but there's a natural outflow, right? One leads to the other very naturally. So what are they? 6th house, house of work, house of servitude, right? If you're working, that's naturally going to acquire resources. It's going to influence your resources. If you're serving other people, right, or other people are serving you, that's naturally something that is supportive, even if it's you being the supporter. The 10th house is going to deal with our public life, right? Again, what we do in our career, how we are perceived publicly is going to naturally influence the resources we acquire, right? Success, wealth are kind of tied together a lot of times, at least in current modern society, but also the kind of people you run into, right? If you're perceived as a very good person publicly, you're going to get a lot of support because you're going to generate a lot of followers, right? Going back to that 11th house. The second house is going to be in aversion to the 7th, to the 1st, to the 3rd, and to the 9th. Now, the 9th is kind of an interesting one because the 9th house is going to deal with our belief systems. All right, why are they uncomfortable with each other? Well, because sometimes our values don't mesh with the things that we learn in the world. That's why it's an uncomfortable connection, right? Why it can't quite see each other. When you go out into the world, when you push yourself beyond who you are naturally, that opens you up to new opportunities, new ideas, new ways of thinking. And yeah, for most people, at some point in your life, you're going to run into things that come in complete conflict with the things that you value, right? It may also cost money, right? You want to travel, 9th house, that's 9th house. It's going to cost money, right? Or if you want to learn and you want to grow in your field, it's naturally going to increase your wealth too, or potentially, assuming you don't get mountains of student debt, student loans. But yeah, so the 9th house has a kind of a challenging aspect where it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to see things that challenge what you value. The 7th house deals with partnerships, attachments, right? The second house is about your personal support systems, your personal resources. When you come into contact with other people, right? That's something that's naturally uncomfortable to share with them. Right? Again, that's why there's kind of that challenging aspect to it. And then as we've talked about with the first house, and then finally with the third house deals with what? Practical skills, our local space, how we kind of handle our learning, things like that. And it has a kind of a similar reasoning behind why the 9th house is challenging or is in aversion, right? It's not, I don't want to say it's a challenge so much as it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable for the 2nd and 3rd to kind of work together. Why? Because 3rd house is dealing with stuff you see every day. And you don't really want that kind of personal values to kind of be out there in the open every day. You want to live by it, certainly, but it's not something you go around sharing and you kind of hone as a daily skill, a daily practice. It's not really the way that stuff kind of works. Now, one does lead to the other, certainly. So that's the 2nd house. I hope this wasn't too abstract. I know it's at times I kind of get a little mixed up on my wording here, but it's easily one of the most important houses in astrology. Very low key, though. Most people tend to look at some of the other stuff and think that's more important, but 2nd house is so important. Not because it's what gives us money, because you can get money from other places in the chart, but really because it's going to show how difficult a time a lot of people have. If you have a really hard, challenging 2nd house, you're not going to have a lot of support, or at least not easily. And so you have to rely more on yourself, and that can be very hard to do. Whereas a good 2nd house can kind of alleviate a lot of problems. So it's a super important house. It's going to show us our personal resources, how we value them, how we value our intangible resources, right? Our virtues, our ethics, right? Our personal sense of values and code and worth. And that kind of all flows out together. So that's the 2nd house. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I am a practicing astrologer. If you're interested in a reading, I do personal readings. I also do relationship readings, as well as I can do like yearly forecasts. If you want a reading, reach out to me. My email is james@jdastrology.com. Alternatively, just go to jdastrology.com. That's my website, and you can book it there. So again, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful week.